Everybody, Dr. Eric Balcavage, we're back for another edition of the Thyroid Answers podcast. And today we're talking about rewiring the brain to help in your recovery process. And my guest today is Dr. Patrick Porter. He has spent his life exploring one powerful question, and that is, what if we could train the brain like a muscle to transform lives without pills, without struggle, or without guesswork? Dr. Porter is a pioneer in brainwave entrainment, and we'll talk about what that actually means, and the creator of BrainTap, a device. I got one sitting right here on my desk, a revolutionary technology now used by more than 120,000 people, professional athletes, and over 3,000 clinics around the world. He's been featured in Wall Street Journal, CNN, and even the Joe Rogan Experience. And his book that has now been released is The Brain Fitness Blueprint. And this book dives into how visualization, light, sound, and neuroplasticity can help the brain heal, perform, and thrive. Dr. Porter, welcome to the Thyroid Answers podcast. I'm excited to have this conversation. I think we've talked about this type of stuff in the past. I have a BrainTap, and we've talked about how this can help people, but now we're getting to do it live in a podcast. So I think maybe the place to start is to find out, how do we define what brain fitness is?
Okay, so what most people do is they think their brain has to run by default. So they don't do anything to actually motivate it or educate the brain. And what most people don't realize is the brain is always looking outside itself to synchronize with its environment. We have something called mirror neurons. And so if we let life happen, let's say that we're watching the news, that's going to actually downregulate our nervous system, because the news is full of fear, anxiety, frustration. It's full of things that we can't do anything about. And the brain doesn't like uncertainty. So it's like a Stephen King novel every time you turn on the news. So when we're talking about brain fitness, is how do you want your brain to operate? Just like muscles. If we go to the gym, do we want to work out our upper body, our lower body? What do we want to do about it? Well, brain waves work in the same way. So when we think about brain fitness, most people, their brain is dysregulated, which means in the morning they wake up and they do things that dysregulate their brain, like waking up to an alarm clock, which we can get into a little bit later, or drinking a cup of coffee first thing in the morning, or in the middle of the afternoon when their brain has basically everybody in the world, wherever you're at in the world, your temperature is going to drop 2 degrees at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, no matter where you're at in the world. This is tied to the circadian rhythm. But people will not do what they're supposed to be doing, which is to do some kind of brain fitness, which means to do some breath work, do some meditation, do some relaxation techniques, maybe even take a nap. But we don't have 4 hours anymore, so we got to do some kind of biohacking, if you will. So we're going to talk about that. And then in the afternoon, when you go to bed, most people don't go to bed correctly. They think they can watch the news or do some kind of agitating activity, which really triggers cortisol, norepinephrine, and dopamine, which is what you want in the morning, but not at night. They don't downregulate their lighting systems around the home. They don't do some kind of relaxation before they leave. They don't get off the screens an hour before bedtime. They don't realize how to set up their bedroom for deep sleep. And they don't know that the best time to do brain fitness isn't when you're awake. Your brain does more neurological work when you're sleeping than when you're awake. So we can talk about that. So there's 3 different times a day we talk about brain fitness, and most people, they don't realize it. They're thinking they're doing everything right, but the reality is that they're doing everything counterintuitive to what really needs to happen, because the things you need to do are simple, and our ancient ancestors have been doing them. It's all recorded. I mean, when you just look at our brain fitness in the world today, when we have so many people getting Alzheimer's and dementia, but in ancient traditions, I don't know of any ancient tribe that says we keep the wisdom of the tribe with the youngsters. They kept the wisdom of the tribe with the elders. So that must mean we're doing something with our lifestyle, because our brain is not designed to dysregulate and have dementia. When I was growing up, I'm 64 years old. So when I was growing up in Iowa, where my family was farmers, my aunts and uncles were 90 years old, playing cards, counting cards. I didn't know anyone that had dementia or Alzheimer's. They were active. They were eating healthy foods from the farm. They didn't have maybe they watched the news, maybe they didn't. But the reality is that they didn't have all the lifestyle distractions we have today. So what we have to do is we have to look at what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. We're going to give some tips to the listeners that they don't have to have BrainTap to do. Of course, BrainTap is one of the ways that we've just accelerated because people want something quick and easy. We have a problem in the world today. Stress is causing the nervous system to dysregulate. So we need to create a technology that can be scaled across the world and be delivered on demand at any time people want this brain fitness. So when we think about it, think about when we talk about brain waves, we'll talk about
so
that.
We're going to get into, I don't want to, I want to kind of keep this keep a flow here a little bit. So for the listener, very simply, how would you define brain fitness? What does it mean? Like, are we talking about, and I talk about what I call fitness factors. I talk about cognitive fitness. I talk about emotional fitness. I talk about mindset fitness. So is brain fitness an umbrella for those things? So how do you define a simple definition for what brain fitness is? And then what does it encompass?
Brain fitness is the capacity of your brain to change gears. So think of these brain waves like gears in a car. If you're not able to change gears because you're in sympathetic drive, which most people are in sympathetic overload, which means they're in fight or flight and they're in neurological lock, you don't have brain fitness. When it's time to flee, you need to be able to flee. When it's time to relax, you need to relax. If you're not able to flip the switch and do those things, you don't have brain fitness. There's going to be, so it's all about flexibility. Like heart rate variability, you need brainwave flexibility.
Okay, so if we wanted to say simply put that brain fitness is the ability of the brain to adapt to our environment, the stress load of our environment, and still maintain a homeostatic state. Would that be fair?
Yes, that's a good way to say it. Yes.
Right. So we have the ability, the adaptability under different stress levels to adapt to the stress, but still maintain a homeostatic state.
Right.
Okay. So that's key, because when we think about what creates poor health, it's usually an excessive load of stress that we can no longer adapt to. And it changes our physiology from this low stress homeostatic regulatory state to this adaptive state, which is good if we're in it short term. But then eventually when the stress becomes too significant, that can start to trigger sustained adaptation and even push us into what we call the cell danger response. And that totally changes how everything in the body works. Would you agree with that?
Yes. And we talk about not eliminating stress, but building capacity for stress. Your brain can do far more than you think it can, but only if it's trained to do it. You can't just, like flying a Black Hawk helicopter, you can't just put somebody in behind the cockpit. You have to train them. And actually, the training is so severe that they actually want to exclude you because they want to find people that automatically have that kind of brain. But in our life, we can't just opt out of our life. We have to figure out how we're going to handle those stresses in our life. And that's what we can talk about. And that's brain fitness, really. I mean, what is your life like? What is overwhelming you? What is causing you to stay up at night? What is causing you stress? And then what kind of training can we provide that allows you to maximize brain function so you can get through those solutions?
Yeah. And we'll get into this later. I think what you started saying, and I think it's important, is that the problem usually isn't the stress. It's our interpretation of the stress in our environment, right? And it's much like exercise. Exercise can be problematic depending on how it's done, right? And the length, the duration, the intensity, and lack of exercise can be problematic, right?
Right.
But we're always training the brain. The issue is, how are we training the brain, right? That becomes the real issue. And I think that's what you were talking about in the beginning. If you're bringing in a lot of negative stressors into the physiology and you're interpreting them as danger, as fear, as negative stressors, it's going to have impact on your physiology. It's going to potentially drive that sympathetic dominance, that cell danger response. And it causes every system potentially have to adapt. I call it a multi-system adaptive disorder because people under excessive stress loads, their body is going to try and protect them. Their chemistry is going to protect them. And we should expect under that excessive stress load that they're going to have a thyroid issue, a gut issue, adrenal issue, right? We sometimes look at this in functional medicine. Oh, you just have an adrenal issue. Oh, and that's a separate issue, your thyroid issue. And your depression is a separate issue. When in reality, in my model, it's all part of the adaptive response to an excessive level of negative stress on the system.
Exactly. And it really comes down to two factors. Do you look at life as a threat or a challenge? And they now know even our DNA structure. When they said they mapped the human genome in 2003, they only mapped 1%. But in 2018, they actually have science now that shows every DNA pair in your body changes every 40 seconds based on two things. Is it a threat or is it a challenge? And they've actually shown in science that if you look at it as a threat, your body actually down regulates all DNA pairs to prove that it is a threat. And so we go into the cell danger response like you're talking about. The body goes into protective mode. But if we look at it as a challenge, like those people that rise to the occasion under stress, that's what we're talking about brain fitness. We want you to rise to the occasion. There's no threat you can't handle. You know, when they say God doesn't give you things you can't handle, right? And my wife has a t-shirt that says, God must think I'm a badass, you know, because, you know, sometimes it appears that we can't handle that stress. But the reality is that once we rise to the occasion, we understand that we have skills, we have resources, we have books we can read, podcasts we can listen to, supplements we can take, movement we can do, physical fitness. We can, all these things, you know, when we line them all up, number one is eating correctly, because you can't outthink a bad diet, right? That takes one stressor out of the way. But if you're adding stress on the physiological just by eating a lot of sugars and bad fats and things like that, that's just one level of stress you can just eliminate just by making conscious decisions. And then number two, moving and breathing, that's going to eliminate one stress too, because when we sit too long in front of screens and we're not moving, we can get rid of that stress. Now, number three is, what are we going to do to build capacity? And that's what we can talk about today.
Yeah. So yeah, we're going to get into all this stuff. I just want to kind of keep it in kind of a sequential process so that we stay on track here. So we talked about different stressors on our coming into the human body can either make us stronger, or it can cause us to be more in kind of danger physiology. And that is likely going to result in changes in signs and symptoms. But how does someone, or how do you determine somebody's level of fitness? How can we assess somebody's level of brain fitness? Are there specific signs or symptoms that somebody should look for? Are there certain lab values that somebody should look for? Are there, let's start with that. What are the signs and symptoms or lab markers that somebody might want to look at to say, my brain health is struggling?
Yeah, there's two things they need to improve before they do anything else. And they're very simple. You can get biometric markers, whether it's a Whoop or a ring or anything like this. You have to deal with your stress. If you don't have a way to handle and manage your stress load and get that down by doing some kind of exercise, it could be breathing techniques, yoga, Tai Chi, dance, whatever, get your body moving, and you're not changing your diet, then those markers, that's the first marker. And then if you're not improving your sleep is where you incubate all those superpowers you need in the next day. So that's why we focus on that. So if you don't measure your sleep, you can't really change something you're not measuring. So get some kind of biometric that measures your sleep. If you're not getting 1 hour of deep sleep and 2 hours of REM sleep, fix that first. Because if you don't get 1 hour of deep sleep, you're not detoxing the brain. There's only 3 reasons that the brain is dysfunctioning. One is thoughts, traumas, or toxins. So in the toxic load happens as we age. Just metabolism itself is going to bring toxins to the brain. And imagine this, Dr. Eric, in 2015, they found a new system of our physiology. Because when you and I were in college, every physiology book in the world showed the lymphatic system stopping at the neck. But then a doctor under a sleep study showed, hey, what's this system that's operating when we get to level 4 sleep? They now call it the glial lymphatic system. This system is what detoxifies the brain. So if you're not measuring your sleep scores, 1 hour of deep sleep, 2 hours of REM sleep, fix that first. If you're not measuring your stress load during the day, which means you're wearing a device that tells you, hey, I'm under stress, you might not know you're under stress because you think that's normal. But there are biometric markers out there. Now, if you were to come into my lab here in New Bern, North Carolina, we have 10 different pieces of equipment. We could measure your nervous system and we could tell you what's going on, and we could create a fix, whether it's the PNOE, which could measure VO2 max, which is really important because every negative behavior in the world has one thing in common: lack of breathing. So if we can get a person breathing, they can regulate their their stress load. Most people don't realize how much they're holding their breath and disrupting the natural flow of our physiology. So we could measure blood flow across the frontal lobes. That's a good way to do it. Lab tests don't do a good job because lab tests only actually, they're good for a lot of things, but they're not good for what I'm talking about because they're only measuring 23% of the blood flow in the body. What we really want to know is what's the capillary load? The capillaries are where it's important. And that's why I always recommend people do B3 or niacin, but start off really slow because you're going to have a niacin flush. We need to flush out those systems. And I'll just use one example so the listeners understand. Everybody's into this peanut oil craze, and they go to Chick-fil-A and they think it's healthy because they use peanut oil. But what they don't know about that study was every monkey in that study died within 3 months of that study because the oil did not stay in the blood that they were measuring. It went into the capillaries and blocked the blood flow to the actual cells. So if you're not having blood flow oxygenation in blood flow to the cells, those cells will die. So niacin, B3, which is a very economical, you can go to Amazon unless you have a solution that's better. You can buy a month's worth of niacin for less than $30. And it's the best thing you can do every morning. Besides drinking at least 2 glasses of water with salt in it, with Celtic salt, like the 12 main minerals that we need to hydrate the body, because every night when you go to sleep, your brain is going to shrink 3/4 of an inch through detoxification. In the morning, it's craving water and minerals. So when you give it that, and then if you do at the same time, you do a niacin flush, what's going to happen is you're going to flush out the system. So think about it like you want to flush out the pipes so you can get better flow through the body. That's what we're talking about. And those capillaries are what makes up the most of the blood flow. So there are devices. There's actually one that you can do with even on your phone. You can use your phone like a pulse oximeter, and it can tell you capillary health. That's a really good marker. If you don't have good capillary health, then you're going to have problems.
Well, a couple things I want to talk about. One of the things is we talk about the devices. There's Oura Ring, there's Whoop bracelets, there's a number of these devices out there. There's more coming out every day. There is some argument about how accurate these things are. So
we've tested them. They're only 60% accurate.
Right.
And the reason, but they're okay as long as you use the same device to measure yourself. So it's about getting a standard for yourself. Like we have a NeuroCheck. It's a device that we created. It's 100%. We've tested it against the Shiba machine. We've tested it against acupuncture devices that measure meridians across technology. And that device only takes 5 minutes to do, but it's $4,000. So not a lot of people out there are going to buy it for themselves personally. And it's not something you can just wear around. It's something at a clinical level. So, but I think for everyday users, you just pick one that you like and stick with it and get those scores.
Yeah, I think it's important that people understand that they're a tool, they're not the tool. There's some challenge with the accuracy. All of these things measure a little bit differently. And from what I've seen, it appears, and you may know different because you're doing this more in a lab, maybe in a lab setting, that the rings may have a little bit better data, depending on how that ring is formatted, than maybe the wrist straps because of the more air getting in between the skin contact. So it maybe the rings might be a little bit more reliable, but I think none of them are perfect. So right. It's a tool, not the tool.
Well, they're all making it up. So they have to understand that, because we went to the actual person that owns the patent on HRV. Between each heartbeat, you're measuring, there's parameters called the RR function. And we measure 9 parameters. The Oura Ring measures 2, but it measures them in a way that doesn't work with physics. You need 3 parameters to measure in physics. So the Russians who own the patent, they know the frequency of every cell in your body. And everybody's cellular structure is the same. I don't care where you live, what you're doing, it's all the same. A heart vibrates at a certain frequency, your liver, and all these things. And then, so we know that. We'll know your date and time when you're born. We also will present a signal to the body. Now, our strategy is you'd have to wear 2 rings to get the right information. That's why I'm saying they're making it up. So they get one piece of information, and then they extrapolate it. It's pretty close. I mean, 60% is pretty close for what they're charging. It's not a bad deal. You just need to know that it's you might put on the Whoop and you might put on the Oura Ring and go, these aren't the same. What's going on? Why is this different? It's because they're all making it up differently because they didn't go to the source like we did. I went to the actual source of people that own the patent. And I said, let me license it from you instead of making it up myself. These companies don't want to pay the money to the people that own the patents. And because I'm an inventor, I'm going to go to the patent holder and I'm going to pay them to get the right information.
Okay. So people that you're saying, hey, have some type of a metric that you can measure. Mm-hmm. Is there validated questionnaires that somebody can utilize to assess their brain fitness that you utilize? Yes. That they can easily access through?
Yeah, if somebody out there wants to do that, they can reach out to us at BrainTap. Francisco Cedral, my science officer, he actually wrote the book Photobiomodulation of the Brain with Dr. Hamlin at Harvard. Every student right now in school that learns photobiomodulation reads his textbook. He's my science officer. And what we've done is we've put together Google Forms that people can do their own self-assessments that are validated for science, like the Pittsburgh Quality of Sleep Score. That would be a good one for people to measure their sleep on. And it doesn't take a watch or a ring. It's basically self-assessing, what's going on, but it'll give you a good idea. And then there's also a happiness score test. We have about 7 tests that they can take, and we can make it available to anybody that reaches out to us at research@braintap.com. We can give you the links to those. So
brain fitness is kind of the umbrella, and then within there's different things. Same things I do in my practice: sleep fitness, emotional fitness, intellectual fitness, relationship fitness. So we're looking at all these things that influence overall brain fitness, right? So there are things that they can do to kind of self-assess themselves and kind of get an idea where they're at, and then we'll talk later about how they go about trying to improve their brain fitness. I want to touch on one more thing, and I know you were talking about the niacin piece as something that could help with a flushing, increase brain flow. And I think one of the things that is a huge challenge today in the human population is that we're just chronically inflamed, and inflammation changes nitric oxide flow. And when we change nitric oxide production and flow, that's having the biggest impact on neurologic function and vascular flow. Instead of like small pulsatile outbursts of nitric oxide, we're getting massive bursts of nitric oxide that then we get the conversion, unfortunately, to superoxide, and then we get more oxidative stress. So do you agree that the inflammatory process, and not that inflammation is a bad thing, we need inflammation, it's an important thing, but really at the root of much of what's going on with our physiology is just chronic, low-grade, sustained inflammation created by our diet and our lifestyle and our behaviors?
Yes, that's 100% accurate. I mean, when we've measured about 30,000 brains in the last 10 years, we see that the average person is operating in a delta state. So think of delta as your sleeping brain. When we measured their brain function, and we call it a symphony of brainwaves, they actually, 90% of the people we will evaluate, they actually are awake with a sleeping brain. That's why they have to stimulate. They have to eat sugar and coffee and tea. They keep stimulating because the brain's saying, you have inflammation. You need to go to sleep so we can solve this problem. And like you said, inflammation is a good thing and it's a bad thing if it's not regulated. And that's why we use light, actually, when we talk about the BrainTap, because that light will interact with the physiology. And when it enters the electron chain and creates that vasodilation and blood flow circulation, it's actually creating nitric oxide. That's why they got the Nobel Peace Prize for like red light therapy and lasers and things like this. Mm-hmm. And then it stimulates ATP production. So it's all like a symphony of activities that happen. It's not just one thing. It's not like this one thing. And then of course, you can do supplementation for that too. There's some good supplements out there for that. But the real thing, the way where you do it is breathing. Your breath,
yeah, so
you regulate your breathing.
And I want to talk about that because I think there's a think there's a nuance to what you're saying about breathing and breath work. Some people would think the more I breathe, the better my oxygen transfer to the tissues, or the healthier I am. And I don't necessarily agree with that. It's not about more breath breathing. It's about a more appropriate breathing. And sometimes the person who has less respiratory, has a lower respiratory rate, is actually doing a better job oxygenating the tissue, right? And so when we think about respiration rate, what's, from your standpoint, is it better for somebody to breathe 25 times in a minute, or is it better for somebody to breathe 6 times in a minute? And how do we determine which one is what's better?
Yeah.
It's not about,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I would say that your breath controls your brain function. So what are you about to do? In the morning, you should do what we call psychological breathing, or you can even do breath of fire, which is a really rapid breath. You might even do 75 breaths in a minute. But that's going you have to know that's only a short burst of time. It's going to trigger the brain to create the neurotransmitters you need, like cortisol, norepinephrine, and dopamine. Those are the things. This is how you can trigger, we call it digital coffee when we're doing it with BrainTap, but you can trigger your own. That's how you get excited. So these are things, if you're getting ready to do a sport, or you're getting ready to do, you want to wake up, you can actually get high in your own supply, like a Wim Hof breath. If people know about Dr. Wim Hof, or not doctor, the Wim Hof breathing technique, that's really a breathing that exacerbates the cortisol levels. It gets you fired up, right? So you don't want to do that before bed, right? So when the truth is, in all ancient traditions, and I have 12 different studies published on PubMed about breathing. So people can just look me up on PubMed and they'll see the studies we've done with Ames Bhopal, like the pranayama breathing and all these. If you can breathe correctly, the less breaths per minute, the longer you're going to live. They've proven that in science. So it's not about getting a lot of breaths, but sometimes we need to do that rapid breathing. Now, in the middle of the day, what we recommend is the box breathing, or any time that you feel like you're just overwhelmed. And they teach this to our special forces. And it's a really easy breath. You just breathe in to the count of 4, you hold it to the count of 4, you breathe out to the count of 4, you hold it out to the count of 4, and you continue that box breathing for 2 to 3 minutes. It literally regulates the nervous system. And there's 3 parts of the nervous system you want to be concerned with, not just sympathetic and parasympathetic, which is your fight or flight, rest and digest. There's something called the neurohormonal system. And think of it as your backup system. And most people spend all their time on the backup system. They do supplementation, they do exercise, they do all these things. But the reality is that the electrical system, these need to be balanced. And think of the neurohormonal as if we had a hurricane, we're going to turn on the generator. It's going to take a lot more energy to use your body to do these things. So, but in the middle of the day, you could do it at stoplights. You could do it when you're sitting in the doctor's office, between commercials. These are times you just want to start training your brain with these breathing techniques. Now at night, it's really important that you do what we call a 4-8 breath. Breathing in, if you can't do 4-8, then you do 2-4. But the measurement is for the amount of time in, it's twice as long out. And the reason for that is that's going to create that nitric oxide exchange in the brain. It's going to downregulate the nervous system, and it's going to put you into what we call a delta state. And that delta state is what you need for rest, digest, and recovery. So each of these breaths, and there's only 3 breaths. I mean, some people would tell you there's 100 different ways to breathe, so these are just 3 easy breaths, but they're all used for different things. So you could use that 4-8 breath. Let's say that you're just exhausted. Something happened during the day. Maybe you just got done crying or something going on. You could lay down and do the 4-8 breath at that time. Or let's say that you're exhausted. You need to go do something. You could do that psychological breathing, or that breath of fire, they call it, where you do that rapid breathing. So think of breathing as a way you shift gears of the brain, and breath will do that for you.
Yeah, I talk about respiratory fitness is one of the key categories. I have 18 fitness factors that I work with patients on, and respiratory fitness is one of those. And so for the listener, I think what's important here is, in general, as we're going through the day, right? If we just ask you for your respiratory, if I have you track your respiratory rate, I want to see what the overall average, the average is. If you're averaging 18 to 25, even though that's what the literature says is normal, that's not normal, that's common. You're probably breathing too much, too shallowly, you're blowing off too much carbon dioxide. And even though you may walk around with a oxygen saturation of 99%, that's not necessarily healthy. I would rather see my patients, and you probably measure this in the lab. I'd rather see a patient have an oxygen saturation, maybe 96%, which means that they're giving up the oxygen. People assume that if they're just breathing in oxygen, it's going to go to the tissue. The only reason that red blood cell wants to give up oxygen is because there's more carbon dioxide there. So if we really truly want to oxygenate the tissue, we can't be doing lots of rapid, short, shallow breathing all day. It's not healthy for us. So breathing is important. And the thing that Dr. Porter was just talking about, that's kind of our normal state. It's like me. What do I do during the day? Do I sit at my desk? Do I stand up? Do I move around? How many steps do I got? That's just kind of the normal for the day. And then the other things he was talking about was really training your respiratory fitness. These different respiratory techniques are ways to train your respiratory fitness. Just like we're talking about brain fitness, to have better brain fitness, you have to have good respiratory fitness. So there's lots of different techniques. You got Buteyko breathing, you got Wim Hof method. There's there's tons of breathing techniques. I agree with that. And they all can do different things to the physiology. And, probably Wim Hof has been one of those kind of louder voices in the space that has shown all the crazy things that him and his disciples can do when they just work on breath work. So it's impressive. Unfortunately, many of us just don't even think about how we breathe. Are we nasal breathing? Are we mouth breathing? We don't think about all those pieces, but it is a critical piece to consider. So I want to kind of finish. I have a couple more questions in this section and we talked about respiration. We talked about sleep. What are the other drivers that somebody might think of, and they say, okay, if my brain fitness is diminished because I can't think, I've got brain fog, I got chronic fatigue, I got anxiousness, I got depression, I got anxiety, something's going on with the brain in their life and lifestyle. And before we ever go to supplementation, because I'm a supplement minimalist, I think we need to change life habits and behaviors first. What are the things that they should be looking about in their environment to say, that's not helping my brain health, that might be, that isn't? What are the things they need to be aware of that are eroding their brain health and fitness?
I'm on board with you as well on the supplementation, because we have the world's greatest pharmacy between our ears. If we can trigger that, we're going to have much better results. Now, we do have to supplement because we don't get the nutrients that we need, certain supplements. But one thing I think is, remember thoughts. People think they're going to have some miracle thing by doing affirmations. The reality is that we have to do this. I call it Tai Chi for the mind. So when you have a negative thought come up, they're going to happen. Our biology is such that the average person has a 50 to 60,000 word tape loop that plays in their head. And unfortunately, the science says 90% of them are negative until you change those thoughts. So how do you change those thoughts? That's part of brain fitness. I'm going to give one example. Let's say you have a negative thought about something coming up. You're going to say to yourself, stop. You're going to visualize a red stop sign. Stop giving that thought energy. Stop giving it time in my mind. But then you're going to replace it with 3 new thoughts. Now, why 3 new thoughts? Because the brain builds neuroplasticity in the same way as what they call the Fibonacci sequence. The first time is an accident. You think this thought and you think, what's a different way of thinking? And you have to get creative about this. Just like a golfer, like if I'm working with a golf pro and they hit a bad shot, I say, before you leave that spot, visualize that shot going perfectly 3 times. Because the brain will throw out the bad one and only remember the good ones. We need to do the same thing in our life. So whether we had an outburst with a family member, friend, or coworker, whatever it was, how would we like that experience to be different? Because we get in life what we rehearse, not what we intend. Intention is great, but if intention without action is just mental masturbation. You need to actually do the work, because if not, it's just a playing in your head. So when you do these 3 things, and then what you do is you pick out of those 3, you say, I'll do that one. And then what would it feel like if you did that? Get your physiology to play a role, because your nervous system doesn't know the difference between real or imagined. It only knows what you're thinking about. Now, at first, this is going to be hard for people because you've got a lot of negative thoughts, and that's not a bad thing. It's just our genetic inheritance. We are the genetic inheritance of a bunch of paranoid people. They lived They didn't die. They didn't get eaten by animals. They didn't fall off a cliff. They were very cautious. They were very reserved. And so we're at a different time now. We don't have to worry about food anymore. Most people listening to this podcast don't worry about shelter. All the things that Maslow talks about in his hierarchy of needs, we're up there in enlightenment stages now because we don't have to worry about those other things. But now our problem is, do we get enough likes on Facebook? Do we have enough, whatever's going on in our life? These are not what we call second world problems. These are first world problems. So we have to think about how is it now. The reason that's important for the listener is when you have stress, worry, frustration, all negative emotions, it triggers the liver to release its glucagon. There's 25 grams. So think of it as 5 tablespoons of sugar get dumped into your bloodstream. Then a vicious cycle happens. Insulin gets released. Insulin is a fat storage hormone. So when you think about it, you're telling your body, first of all, you need sugar to flee that, whatever that is, but you're sitting at your desk or you're looking at your phone or you're just talking to somebody. You're not going anywhere. You're sitting down. All that sugar, you can only have 1 circulating teaspoon of sugar in your bloodstream at any one time. And if your muscles are already full because you didn't work out this morning, so there's no place for that sugar to go, the body has to produce adipose tissue. And then the unfortunate problem is they now know that fat creates its own ecosystem. It becomes like its own brain. So it drives behavior to stay alive, just like everything else in creation. It's trying to figure out how to live. So we have to figure out a way to, first of all, shut off that spigot, because if you're somebody who's been stressed out for a long period of time, our body's designed for 3 or 4 of those stressful events a week. Not the average person looks at their cell phone 300 times a day. And now, if you look at life as a challenge, that might be okay. You're just like, hey, what am I going to do? What's going on? You're positive about it. That's fine. But if you look at life as a threat, every time you look at that phone, oh no, what happened? What's going on? You're going to trigger that negative response over and over again. That's why we say only look at your cell phones at certain periods of time. Set it on. Even do not disturb at different times, because you create the triggers that cause this to happen. So these are all part of the thought process. So if you can just start catching those thoughts on a daily basis and know that you're the genetic inheritance of a bunch of paranoid people. And, when the Hopi Indians said, my ancestors, 7 generations of my ancestors are guiding me. That's what they would say in their ancient text. But our neuroscientists now say 54 generations of our ancestors are playing into our DNA. So, Dr. Eric, I could take your DNA today and I could staple it to the floor. It would reach to Pluto. It's a viscous material that absorbs light energy and transmits as codes to our body that actually changes every 40 seconds. Every DNA pair in your body rebraids every 40 seconds. You are not the same person that started this podcast. Nobody listening to this podcast is the same person. And we're changing and that's just on the DNA level. Every cell is changing and adapting. We have an adaptive system. So thoughts control a lot of that. So if we can catch those negative thoughts, what the brain will do is, at first it becomes difficult. Like I said, it's a conscious thing. But after you do it for a while, it becomes an unconscious thing. You start catching these thoughts unconsciously. That's when you start to empower yourself and you get that brain fitness I'm talking about. Because that's why I say negative thoughts, concepts, and beliefs have no control over you. If somebody listens to my BrainTap sessions, because those negative thoughts, that's just part of nature. And it's okay to have a negative thought. They protect us, but you just need to know how to control them.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things to kind of touch base with, and kind of summarize a couple of those points. And I talk about this on the podcast. I talk about my book. Is that we're built to essentially, from early on in life, with a nervous system that's defensive, protective. Our limbic system is kind of the some people call it the reptilian brain, so that it's, hey, if there's danger, I need to protect myself. And we all needed that. Early days, there were things trying to eat us and kill us and destroy us. And in today's world, we don't have as many things that are trying to eat us, kill us. And that, as we start to develop with loving and nurturing and all these things, we kind of build the upper part of the brain and kind of tamp down that very defensive part of the brain, the limbic system. And it's not that part's bad. We need it. When we're threatened, we need that part to kick in. The problem And I think from what you're saying is that, all of what comes to us can either, there's negative things that come to us, but it's not about what's happening to us or around us as much it is as our interpretation of what that means to us. And one of the things I think you were saying there is we need to consider reframing how these things impact us. It's the terminology I typically use with clients. Like, I'm getting it, my husband is and I are splitting up and it's very upsetting. Yeah, but let's reframe it. Like, if it was a bad relationship and it wasn't fixable, the longer you would have stayed in it, the more miserable you would have been, the more stress on your physiology. And now, if you guys have agreed to get a divorce, he can go in his direction and find maybe the right match for him. And you have a whole new world open in front of you where you can go find somebody who may be a better match for you at this time of your life, maybe better for you emotionally, better for you physically, better for you financially. And it might just be the best fit. That doesn't always play well when you say it to somebody in the beginning. Well, you don't know what I've been through, but I always tell everybody, listen, everybody, if we sit everybody down, they can tell us a story about what's going on. It's not about what happened. It's the story we're telling ourselves constantly that can continue to drive that stress response. I'm going to ask you to kind of define what neuroplasticity is here in a second, but that whole process is what either is keeping, how we interpret it is either what's keeping us in a more homeostatic state, a balance between our sympathetic and parasympathetic systems, or driving into sympathetic dominance in this upregulated fight or flight response. Would you agree with that?
I would agree totally. And I would ask everyone listening to imagine just for a moment that you're a superhero in training. Now, if you were Superman and kryptonite was could harm you and make you less of a person, you wouldn't show that kryptonite to every person you see and say, this kryptonite causes me to feel this way and that way. And no, you put that kryptonite into a lead box and you store it away and you don't tell anybody about it. This is what people do. I call them the dragons of the past. Your life is not dictated by your past. But if you keep wanting to drag it with you, that's why I call it dragons. Drag on, drag on, drag on. So nobody needs to know about that. It was bad. So what? Move on. You're in superhero training. Once you get over it, like you're talking about let's say the relationship problems, now you have a superpower. You're free to go out there and find that other superhero that you want to be with. And if you see it in that way and you say, wow, this is the proving ground for my superpowers. And I like to use the example of somebody who's maybe has a drinking problem. Once they get over that drinking problem and they're able to say no to alcohol, that's a superpower for them. Before that alcohol was like their kryptonite. Now they put it in that lead box, they got rid of it. Now they have a superpower. No to alcohol. I'm better without it. You know what I mean? Or whether it's sugar or whether it's a bad attitude, whatever it is, think of it as you're in. And then once you have that superpower, you've got to express the superpower. Don't tell people about your kryptonite. The more you talk about your kryptonite, the more you empower kryptonite. You want to talk about the solutions in your life, not the problems in your life. That's why my profession, being a psychologist, they've never had a study published. And I put this out there, anybody out there, you find me a study where a psychologist has better than 12% improvement. I'll pay you $1,000. Because when you talk about the problems, like in my profession, that's why I don't do that. You don't get solutions. Now that's good at first. Talk about it, express it, do whatever you need to do, but then get over it. What are you going to do with your life? What are you going to do to solve that problem? And I think that's where having good brain fitness comes in, and all the other fitness you're talking about, because they all fall in line. If you don't have, it's not just about, brain waves. That's one feature. It's about blood flow circulation. It's about respiration. It's about all these different things, physiology wise, psychologically wise, spiritually, and all these things.
Yeah. And I think that's the key. I mean, bad things are going to happen. Unfortunately, I got a text message. One of my friends passed away last night, and it's sad. I mean, I feel bad for his family, but I immediately reframed the process. He was not doing well. He was sick. He was really struggling, and he's now in a better place. And his family is going to be in a better situation because they're not going through the struggle of seeing him deteriorate. And that may sound like cold-hearted, but it's really just how for me, what I had to learn growing up, going through those things, instead of carrying all that trauma in a backpack, right, with me for the rest of my life,
Right.
it's like, how can I use these things to propel myself forward? How can I use this experience? And instead of seeing, oh, it's terrible, and focus on the death of a friend, instead of that, I'll focus on, okay, what are the things that maybe he was doing that probably weren't helping him? What are all the great times that we had together? Focus on those things versus, oh, they're not here anymore. That doesn't do me any good to wallow in, he's not here and I'm going to miss him. What's going to help me move forward is, what can I learn from his experience that's going to benefit me? And what can I do? How can I use those things to propel me forward in life? And so I totally agree. We too often spend too much time in our pity party and never start saying, okay, but now what am I going to do about it? How do I use these bad things that happen to motivate me? And we do that. That's how we succeed in life. Not everybody's ready to hear that message, unfortunately, because I think some people get really comfortable in their uncomfortableness and they don't want to step outside of that. I don't want to get a divorce even though I'm miserable, because I don't know what is out there. Right. You might, but it might be fantastic. That's if you step outside that that uncomfortable comfort zone. So I think that's a key piece of helping people move forward. So a lot of it, when we're thinking about what creates the stress on the brain or reduced brain health, is really our interpretation of the environment. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. Like in my first book, which was published in 1994, Awaken the Genius, I have a chapter, I was blessed to be the son of an alcoholic. Because it doesn't serve me to say, poor me, my dad was an alcoholic and I have to go to meetings the rest of my life. That doesn't serve me. But he learned, luckily for me, he got help. He became a Silva instructor and helped me to change my life so that I don't have that same problem. The thing is, why would you want to do the same things other people did that were failures? They taught you how not to do it. So do something different, change your life. And I think what you're talking about, even with death, we're not trained how to handle death, but it's a part of life. And I like to tell people, you're not the same person, even right here, right now, everybody listening, you have died 1,000 times or 1,000,000 times. The body you're in right now is no more than 7 years old. Every cell, every atom of your body has changed. You are not the same person but your thoughts, your concepts, your beliefs in yourself, those are the things you bring with you. So those are the things you can change. Our body is changing around us all the time. And unfortunately, just because we weren't prepared for it, we all have an exit strategy. We don't know what that is, but when you get the call, you go, so we have to prepare for that and know that at some point we're not going to, because life, if there's no death, there's no new. Just like death of old relationships to make room for a new relationship, like you're talking about, or you quit a job to get a new job. These are all part of the grieving process. Stop one habit. When they say in the Bible, even, when I was young, I did childish things. When I was adult, I gave up those childish things and did adult things, So when you think about, we've been doing this our whole life. It's just, we like to fixate on things that we don't want to change, but change is the one constant in the universe. Everything's changing. That's why the adaptability we talked about at the very beginning of this podcast was so important. When you become adaptive, not only your body is wanting to be adaptive, it's doing it all the time. When we have a mental adaptation, that's great brain fitness. That's what I'm talking about. So when you're able to adapt and you reframed nobody can replace your friend. You have a space for that person. And when we talk about neuroplasticity, which you're going to ask me about, your brain has what they call you have neurogenesis, which happens like in new experiences, you build neurogenesis, which means you create new neural pathways. But since you were born, when you were born, and everybody listening, when you were born, you were the smartest you're ever going to be. Believe it or not, you were a 100 billion neurobit processor, fully wired at 18.1 volts. We can measure this with something called the Wabi or other EEG equipment like the Shiba. But as we age, that voltage goes down. And as that voltage goes down, it's because of neural pruning, because of our diet, our lack of movement, and our attitudes, whatever. So when that voltage goes down below 7, what we noticed in our study we did with Dr. Kelly Miller in the Saving the Brain study, which is published in a book, we showed that people demonstrated dementia symptoms. because the voltage of the brain was so low, they couldn't have neuroplasticity. They couldn't sleep. Like a lot of adults, 2/3 of the world isn't sleeping. It's because they don't have the energy to sleep. You've probably had children or you've known people that say, my child's too tired to sleep. Most adults are too tired to sleep because they don't have brain energy to sleep. If that voltage drops below 4, you're going to have Alzheimer's-like symptoms. The great thing is, though, through diet and exercise and proper attitude, you can increase the voltage of the brain at any age. Your brain can change at any age. It's not a death sentence. Just because the medical community doesn't believe in it, I've seen it in the lab so many times and through so many studies. Even 90-year-olds we did studies with, we improved brain function in 6 weeks up to 19%. And it would just keep improving. So it's a daily practice. It's something you can do to improve your brain function.
So let's touch on that, because these are big topics for people. One of those is poor sleep. Mm-hmm. And you're talking about, and I don't think people realize this, you and I may realize it, but I don't think people realize it, is that it takes a ton of energy at night. The brain is the biggest driver of energy, consumer of energy, and you need a lot of energy. And if you don't generate energy, there's a couple things that play into it. Maybe we'll talk about those. But if your brain needs to do a lot of work, there's lots of systems that are in regeneration, repair, recovery through the night, requires a lot of cellular energy we call ATP. If you've got low-grade inflammatory mechanisms, if you're in that cell stress response, there's a natural down regulation of mitochondrial function. This is the Thyroid Answers podcast, and I talk about how that relates to thyroid physiology. When there's chronic low-grade inflammation, there's reduced conversion of T4 to T3 in some of these cellular systems, not because it's broken, because it's part of the cell's stress response. We're slowing down repair and regeneration and energy production mechanisms so that we can shift energy towards defense. And that's one of the reasons why we have all those hypothyroid signs and symptoms. But the people think many times that there's something that they need to take to fix sleep. But is sleep really a manifestation of poor energy production overall?
That's what I believe. And I think that a lot of people think that they get energy from food, which is true 4 to 6 hours after you eat it. So if you have HRV, like any of those metrics we talked about, just eat a meal and see what happens to your heart rate variability. It will go down because that's a stress on the system. Now the body's got to break down that chemical compound into light energy. Eventually it's going to have to become light. And that light energy goes into the cells and produces that what I was talking about, the electron transport chain, and creates that ATP that we need. The Krebs cycle starts and all that. Mm-hmm. Now, that's why breathing is so important before you go to bed. But also, before you go to bed, down-regulating the nervous system. Because if you're at high sympathetic, I recommend, if you do want to watch the news, do that early. And notice what happens to you when you watch the news. I would say, get your news early in the day and be done with it. And if it's something you can't deal with, you got to learn a way to compartmentalize it, because they search the whole globe to give us bad news for an hour. And it doesn't do anything good for us. I mean, it might make you aware and you can talk at social events, but it's really not going to help your physiology. But at night, you should be doing things that are uplifting. Some people can raise their energy. Most people don't realize you can change your physiology. People will light candles, right, to relax. But they don't realize that your mirror neurons are actually mirroring the candle's light. That candle flickers at 10 hertz frequency. That happens to be the base for the brain, the neutral for the brain, and it creates alpha activity. So when we were in our labs, even in the 80s, what we did was we used candles, because we didn't have neurofeedback back then. We didn't have what we have today. We used physiology. We used GSR machines or galvanic skin response systems, and we could measure the physiology, the heart rate variability. We would measure heart rate, blood flow, hand temperature. These kind of things would tell us if your hands are cold, you're not in alpha, you're in sympathetic drive. So that's one way you can fix that problem, you said. So before sleep, you should be doing everything you can to get your body in. Now, let's think about ancient traditions. If you and I were in an ancient tribe, and maybe I was out hunting and gathering and you were out doing the same thing, we meet at the communal fire. Maybe you had a lion come up on you, but you made it. So you had the stress response. You're telling me about it. While we're standing in front of the fire, that fire is doing two things for us that we can now learn and do for ourselves in this day and age. One is that fire is crackling and burning at 10 hertz frequency. So if you've ever been to a bonfire and you go, man, I'm mesmerized by that fire, that's because it downregulates the nervous system, puts you into a parasympathetic state for rest, digest, and recovery. And those logs are actually emitting infrared light. You are getting a light dose in front of that fire. When things in nature, especially through fire, they emit light. That light our cells want. That's why we crave the fire. You know, when we're standing, we don't light a fire and go stand in the dark. We build a fire, we stand near the fire. We might even put our hands out there because our hands are great receptors also for absorbing that light energy. But our eyes are the best. Our eyes have the most mitochondria by square centimeter than any other area of the body. Now, the brain, of course, has the most mitochondria per cells, but the eyes, if you took the space of the eyes, there's more mitochondria because we absorb light energy into the eyes and we transmit that light energy out of the eyes. And so when you think about going to bed at night, that's why you want to start turning off lights a couple hours before sleep. Because every cell of your body has something called a chromophore. Think of it like a little battery. And as those cells build up with energy, now in science, we call it photobiomodulation. So we call it that because you are photic in nature. There's the electron chain, there's the chemical chain, of course, and all those things we do in digestion. But the reality is those are downstream. If we go to the NIH's website today and we put in biosphere, you're going to see on the NIH website that in 1994, they said that every living being has a biofield and all illness starts in that field. They say that on the NIH website, but then they give us prescription medicine, which goes counter to that. Because if we put in a drug into our system, our body has to react to that drug. Now, if it works, they say, well, keep taking that the rest of your life. But if it doesn't work, they go, oh, try this one. They keep trying them until they find something because it's the interaction of our body's system that's doing it. But we can do that ourselves. So
I think the key. I want to kind of back up a little bit because I think this is an interesting piece as we think about energy from a chemistry perspective. Mm-hmm. But you're talking about what really drives cellular function is really light energy, not just cellular energy. So just kind of in layman's terms, kind of explain that piece, because I don't think we think about that.
It happens actually from your environment more than anything else. So that's why we have such a effect with the screens and the lights and being inside buildings. If we were outside more, nature itself hovers around 10 hertz frequency. And if we're grounded, we are designed to actually absorb electrons from the earth and deposit electrons into the earth. We're like little acupuncture needles running around for the earth. And the problem is we have insulated shoes. So if you were to go to let's say Home Depot or Lowe's and get on the volt ohm meter, most people listening to us right now would be at 3 volts. If you're at my office right now, I have a grounding mat under my keyboard. Every once in a while I touch it. When I ground myself, I'm at 0. You should be at 0 point as much as possible because then your body can function. Think of those 3 volts coursing through your veins as there's resistance in the body, but also the inflammation markers and all that. But there's also this almost like two radio stations trying to communicate. You can't hear either one of them. We need to have clear communication from our heart to our body. That's the main brain. And so that's the heart rate. That's what heart rate variability matches. But our environment's doing this because 95% of the time you're not present. Your body's taking over all this process. 5% you're doing. So most people spend all their time on that 5%. It really means nothing. That 5% is you're sitting in the back of the bus and Freddy Krueger's driving. You need to get Freddy Krueger off the bus. That's why you have to downregulate through breathing exercise, rest, or doing something like BrainTap, or doing some kind of Tai Chi, yoga, doing something to get you into a present state where you're present in this moment, not focused on the past, not focused on the future. And then your body actually creates a singular event. And just like synchronizing metronomes, for the listeners out there, if you go to YouTube and put in synchronizing metronomes, this guy puts 200 metronomes on the table and he starts them all at different times. Within 3 minutes, all those metronomes are synchronized. Well, that's our cellular system. But if we're stressed out, anxious, worried, we're actually regulating to a dysfunctional frequency. And I want everybody to think about your frequency because it's what you frequently see, frequency. If you're a high frequency person, you see high frequency foods, high frequency activities, high frequency opportunities. If you're low frequency, you would seek out low frequency foods, low frequency people, low frequency opportunities. So this all happens because of our environment. You know, they say if you're hanging around 3 alcoholics, you could be the 4th, right? So that's our friends. We either have gainers and drainers in our life. And so we want to hang around gainers because it actually, our biological system feeds into that because most of the time it's not us consciously. We can do all we can do consciously, but that's not, we are too busy being busy to take care of our biological system. That's why we turn it over to our subconscious. And Bruce Lipton actually says it best in Biology of Belief. You know, he talks about this.
So I think I want to kind of refine this because you're talking about frequency and you're talking about nature's at 10 hertz, right? You're talking about, and you're talking about the campfire light, 10 hertz. You're talking about people vibrating. So somebody's frequency on average should be what? 0?
You should be at 0 point because you're experiencing reality. You're not even part of reality because you're processing reality. You're bringing in through your senses. So these are things, these are cues that tell you really about your distributor system, how you're balanced, all these kind of things. These cues are coming in, but if you have interference, that's why things like feng shui are so important. You know, if you look at, used to be if you had a messy desk, that was a sign of a super brain, but now we know that's not a sign of a super brain. You know, so all these things play into how the stress affects your thinking process.
So let me make sure I have this right, that I'm explaining this. So if I'm walking around at a frequency of 0, right? Then it's like I have no static on the line. If I'm walking around at a frequency of 3 or 4 or higher, that means physiologically there's a lot of static running through my nervous system.
I wouldn't say that's not frequency really, that's voltage. But your frequency, we as humans will flow from 0.5 to 100 in frequency.
So explain frequency to the listener, because we need a simple explanation of what that means to somebody. How would they understand what that means?
Yeah. So every cell of your body has a resonant frequency. It's actually singing a song right now. Every cell is broadcasting some information to the cells around it that makes you, you. Now, let's imagine a choir. When 75 trillion cells are all singing together, you create a harmonics for you. That harmonics is your frequency. And we know this because when we meet people, they go, I got a good vibe from that person, or I got a bad vibe from that person. Or you start listening to music, for instance, and you like that music. That music will actually recruit the production of ATP. You'll start tapping your toe. You'll want to dance. You'll want to move because that music is converted into light energy because you match that frequency. And it's all.
So why should the frequency be 0 then?
No, that's your voltage.
Oh, the voltage should be 0.
So think of resistance. The more voltage you have in the line, the more resistance you have to what's going on around you.
Okay, so voltage-wise, we should be at 0. If we're above that, then we've got more static on the line.
Yeah. So think of it like you're playing your headphones and you got this hum in there. They call it the 60 hertz hum. You know, that's in our electronics. Well, that means the music's not going to be as clear. But if we can get a hum filter, we put that in. Now we have none of that hum. Now we get that good piece of music. That's what I'm talking about. Something like that.
And so everybody's got a different frequency. And so we'll talk about that piece of it, right? So how does somebody know what their voltage is? Can they measure that?
Any voltometer, you can go to Lowe's, like I said, or Home Depot. And then what I encourage people to do is go outside with it if you can and take your shoes off and notice it goes to 0. And this is really important, especially for people that are compromised by EMF. Because our body is getting, the universe, just remember I talked about DNA a little bit ago. That DNA is pulling in codes from the universe, not just from our sun. That sun does something called the circadian rhythm. If we don't get to bed by 10 o'clock, we don't make as much melatonin. 11 o'clock, we don't clean our liver. There's all these things that happen all day long, and it's happening with or without our awareness. But also, we're getting codes from the universe, and they're being broadcast into our DNA. Now, our science says that our thoughts actually transmit 10,000 miles from us. So when you think of thought, it's not just your thought anymore. you've put it out to the field. That frequency of your thoughts are playing into what they call the Gaussian field, or the field of consciousness that we all participate in. That's why they call it the Maharishi effect, because he did studies on it. So there's an effect when mass group of people start thinking a certain way. It actually changes the way people access this field, because this brain we have in our head is like a Google tablet. It doesn't have its own thoughts. Who's thinking the thoughts you're thinking right now? It's not your conscious mind. You're tapping into a higher order of thinking, hopefully, or you're tapping into a lower order of thinking. You get to choose. It's like a radio station. So when you go to get this voltometer, you'll know, hey, am I in a zero? When you're in a 0 point, think of it, now I have infinite possibilities. I can go wherever I need to. If I'm in the mountains, for instance, those mountains operate at 7.8 hertz frequency. That creates GABA. All these brainwave frequencies produce more all the 54 neurotransmitters are triggered by your emotions and through your brainwave activity. Without brainwave change and transmission, you don't tell the gut what to do. Now, the gut will go in default mode if you're under stress, but guess what GABA does? GABA is a precursor to something called DMT. So when you get a lot of GABA in your system, it's also an inhibitor. So it's good for relaxation, helping you to de-stress. So when you go to the mountaintop, when somebody says, I had a mountaintop experience, what they're saying is, I created DMT in that moment. I had that epiphany. I had that neuroplastic change, because every time you have that aha moment, you've literally created a neural pathway. Now, if we can keep that neural pathway going, Hebb's law says those neurons that fire together, wire together. And then those things we don't do, it also says, if we don't do them, they unwire. So we want to give energy to what we want to do and not give energy to things that are holding us back. That's why I said, don't even think about them. Stop. Like I said, the little exercise, because it's all going unconsciously. So brain fitness is about, it's not being perfect. I mean, I'm still working on myself. I've been doing this since I was 12 years old, and life is going to happen to you. Hopefully it's going to happen through you. A lot of people think life's happening to them. It's not. It's happening through you. That is empowering. When it's happening to you, that's disempowering. You have the power to transform every moment. Now, we can't change the way the sun rises and sets. So you got to set your parameters correctly. We can choose if we like the way the sun rises and sets. There's certain things that are going to happen, and it's how do we flow with it? And that's why those flow states are important. And these frequencies we're talking about is sometimes you got to be high frequency. Maybe you got to get some work done. So you put on some high frequency music and you're doing the work, you're exercising, you're doing your thing. Now, when you want to relax, that same music wouldn't work. I mean, if you want to change your frequency, you might put on some classical Baroque music or some new age kind of music that doesn't have drum beats in it. And you just kind of relax, because our body is used to synchronizing with its environment. So the nice thing about this day and age is we carry in our pocket the ability to have soundtracks to our life, anything we want. We can choose our soundtrack, and that can be a carrier frequency that changes our physiology to make us in a healthy state or an unhealthy state.
Okay, so I want to make sure we kind of shift some gears. So if somebody wants to get an idea of I just want tools, right? We're not going to get too in depth. I just want to talk about tools. Somebody wants to assess their brain health and fitness. We talked about looking a wearable device that looks at their sleep. They can look at their HRV. They can look at their respiratory rate. They can look at their oxygen saturation. These are all tools to potentially look at. Now, HRV is going to be variable depending on the device you use and a lot of things that go on. If somebody's looking at their measurable device and saying, okay, what is my target range for my oxygen saturation? What should they be looking at? Should they be looking for 99%? Should they be looking at 98%, 96, 94? What do you generally think is a target area for somebody if they're looking at some of these metrics?
Well, I think anything over 95 is going to be good.
We lost
I think
volume somewhere. Hold on a sec. Did you lose your volume?
No, I got it. You sound the same to me.
Hold on. Can you hear me now? Go ahead, talk.
I can hear you.
Okay. I don't know what happened.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So these the tools that we have for the end user aren't as good as like using the PNOE, which we can measure VO2 max, which actually tells us cellular metabolism at the level of the cell. So but when you look at, as long as somebody's getting 95 or better, they're probably doing okay. But the thing is, do you have energy?
Right. Well, everything is about how we got to compare with signs and symptoms, right? Everything's about interpretation. But this last section, this last 30 minutes, I really want to focus on what are tools and strategies? That's what I really want to focus on. So if we had to give people simple tools at home that they could say, where am I physiologically? We talked about the wearables, so that's why I'm bringing it up. The wearables can give me my oxygen saturation rate. What am I shooting for as a healthy range to say I'm in better shape here, or that this isn't good? So what would you say for oxygen saturation?
It isn't good. If it's below 95, and it's really important that you do that during sleep, because a lot of people, that's why they have all these devices that help you to sleep better, when you're using them. But it's even better if you can use mouth tape and things like that and start to become a nose breather. The difference is that when you mouth breathe, you actually turn on the sympathetic system. That's why they call it the primitive brain. The amygdala gets, and what people don't understand is when the amygdala gets hijacked, it actually lowers blood flow to the frontal lobe. So this is one way oxygen levels, when you have good oxygen levels, the brain goes, we're safe, we're okay. It's a good environment. So that's one thing I think that you can look at.
Right. So we're shooting for an oxygen saturation 95 and above. But if you're tired and fatigued and you're 99, it's probably not great. But and I think somewhere around 96 is probably a sweet spot. If you feel good, if you function good, you're 96%. That's probably a good place. If you're 99%, you're chronically tired, fatigued, you got sleep issues, that's an issue. Respiration rate on one of these devices. What should somebody think about as a healthy respiration rate in general?
Well, I would try to, and when you're just at a resting point, if you can do anywhere below 25 breaths per minute or less, you're going to be in better shape, and you should be looking at your out breath. And I would recommend that the listeners watch their breath while they're listening to somebody, because a lot of times when we're listening to people, we're trying to think in our head what we're going to say next, so we hold our breath. Breathe through that experience, get your body into the flow of the conversation. When you look at somebody who's in love and you have a good rapport, there's good breathing there. But that's one way to test it. And, there are metrics that you can use with these devices to measure your breath. We have 3 different devices here at the lab where we use it for helping people to train their breathing. And they're less than $200. You can go online and get breathing tools and you just have to take the time to practice breathing, because as simple as it seems, when we do this all day long, most people do not know how to breathe.
Yeah, there's lots of techniques, and there's things like heart math and other things that can help you kind of retrain your breathing. And even for those people that say, well, I do breath work and breath exercise, one of the things I think is cool about heart math is it actually tells you if you're changing your physiology, because you could do all the breathing you want, and it doesn't change your state. I learned that myself when I was like, yeah, this is a piece of cake. And then I couldn't get the dial to get into the right color zone. I'm like, this is stupid. And then somebody said to me, what are you thinking about when you're breathing? I'm like, think about all the crap I got to do. Right. You need to, you got to make this a whole body experience, not just I'm just going to breathe in and breathe out. Yeah, so good. We can look at oxygen saturation. We can look at our sleep cycles. And you talked about the metrics that they should be shooting for from a sleep perspective. Say those again for me.
Yeah. Don't think about how much time you have in bed. That's a lie. All longevity studies show 6.5 hours is best, but it's really about 1 hour of deep sleep and 2 hours of REM sleep. Like my wife, she likes to always send me, because I travel more than she does, and this will disrupt your sleep and disrupt your energy. But she always sends me her sleep scores of 97 or better, and she's not a biohacker, but she does do BrainTap, and she measures it. If you can get your sleep scores above 80, that's going to be magical, because most people we measure are in the 30s. So when you think about remember, most people get less than 15 minutes of deep sleep. And just to give you an example, a study we did in Australia, these were coal miners. They averaged 10 hours in bed a night before the study, because we did a 2-week washout study before we did it, just to see how much they were in bed. 10 hours a night in bed, but they only got 1 minute of deep sleep, and most of them virtually got no REM. So they weren't sleeping. They were in bed for 10 hours. but they weren't sleeping. That's why I'm saying sleep is about brain fitness. How do we go to sleep? How do we get into that deep sleep cycle? And it's about these cycles of sleep that we're talking about.
Right. So we'll hit on that real quick. Easy strategies, or maybe not easy, but simple, low-cost strategies that somebody can improve their deep sleep and their REM sleep. What are like two or three things that somebody should start doing to improve those?
Well, 2 hours before bed, start shutting off lights in your home to give the signals to your cells. It's going to be time to relax. Watch the last hour you're up, maybe something inspirational, maybe some comedy, something that's relaxing to you. When you get into bed, a cold environment is best, dark is best. If you have your phone, have it at least 4 feet away from you, because the field of energy will affect you with that phone. If you have an alarm, do not set it to the blaring alarm, set it to some beautiful music to wake you up, because even though you're not anticipating it, we found that when we did studies with sleep, when people set that alarm that actually caused them to have panic through the night because they were anticipating the stressful event in the morning. So you can change that. So those are some things. And then do that breathing exercise I talked about, the 4-8 breath. That would be a good thing to do that's free. And stop any alcohol at least 2 hours before bed.
Yeah. And I would urge people, just some more tips there. Caffeine half-life is like 12 hours, and it is a challenge. As much as I like a cup of coffee, do it as early do it early in the morning, not afternoon. Definitely 12 hours before you want to go to sleep because of the half-life. If you're going to consume it, even if you feel tired in the middle of the afternoon, don't take a cup of coffee or caffeine, because even though you might fall asleep, it's going to disrupt the quality of that sleep, which he was talking about. Yeah. And even though you may be tired and fatigued, I would argue probably one of the best things you can do is get outside and do some physical activity and exercise. Those two things are going to increase the hormone that more people that we really kind of relate. And you can correct me because you may have more insight on this, but people are really focused on melatonin to help with sleep. And I think that's problematic. The melatonin that the pineal gland makes works differently than the melatonin that we take supplementally on the physiology. And so I think the best thing is what Dr. Porter said. Hey, turn down the lights earlier. We need to create more darkness so that the pineal gland makes more melatonin. You can take massive doses of melatonin. It may help short term, but it's not a long-term strategy, and it works differently in the body than what the pineal gland is making. And that's been validated by research. But exercise really important, because when we do a lot of physical activity, when we're outside and doing stuff, we're generating a lot of something called adenosine. And adenosine, I think, is really our one of our true sleep hormones. It's when the adenosine is binding to those receptors that it tells us, hey, it's time to shut down. And this is what really helps us support sleep. Melatonin kind of tricks the brain like, hey, it's time to do this. But I think it's the adenosine that really has an impact. And you can correct me if I'm wrong.
No, and when you exercise too, you actually triggered BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factors, which you call miracle growth for the brain. So that's the neuroplastic change. But I always tell people, when you exercise, spend 5 minutes after that exercise doing some kind of relaxing breath work, or do like a BrainTap session, some kind of mindfulness, because the neuroplasticity does not happen when you're exercising. You gear up and you have all the chemicals. It happens through the rest. That's why when we work with Alex Guerra in Tom Brady's group, they talk about, for every 1 minute of exertion, you need 2 minutes of recovery. It's the recovery that gives you the neuroplastic change and really gets those neurons firing and wiring. So even if you're at the gym, when you take your shower after you work out, just sit there for a few minutes, do some breath work, let your body absorb that BDNF. Don't just run out and get stressed out, because then it just washes out of the brain. And so then you'll have that massive recovery that you want, because we're building capacity. And exercise is one of the greatest ways to build capacity in the brain.
And I think the challenge is, for a lot of us, me included in the past, was it's go, go, go. It's drive, drive, drive. It's more, more, more. And we minimize the rest and recovery piece, which is so critical. So tools that are not simple, straightforward. So healthy diet, healthy exercise, good relationship, good reframing of what goes on. We kind of talked about heart math as a tool to help with breathing and stuff like that. There's different techniques to kind of change what's going on in the brain. And so we want to talk about, you have a technology called BrainTap. So we want to kind of talk about what that is and and then we want to talk about some of the other things that are out there potentially.
Sure.
That may do different things. There's things like there's the Apollo Neuro device that's out there. We got heart math. We've got obviously BrainTap. There's neurofeedback. Mm-hmm. How does all of this stuff play in? And then tell us what BrainTap is and what it does that may make it different than some of these other things.
Let's talk about the other things. I have an Apollo, and what Apollo does is you can set it so that when you get to a certain stress level, it vibrates. So that's one of the nice things for people that don't understand their stress levels. That's a great tool, because once it vibrates, you know, hey, I got to do something right now. My body's in a physiological fight or flight. And so without knowing that or catching that, like I said, catch those negative thoughts, emotions, and beliefs. Now you can change it. Neurofeedback is good to the point that it teaches people that you can change your brain waves. But neurofeedback itself, there's been no study with neurofeedback that shows permanent long-term change, because it's an activity you do. So think about it like going to the gym. As long as you go to the gym, you build muscles. Neurofeedback's the same way. But we showed with heart math, we love it because it's something you can actually do. It's very inexpensive. For $99, you can get the heart math tool. And because breathing is so important to brain fitness, it's just one of the key cornerstones to what's going on. But then when you think about BrainTap as a recovery device that works with all of these. We just finished a study in India with neurofeedback, where the government of India is actually going to replace neurofeedback with BrainTap, because we proved that what they can do with neurofeedback in 40 sessions, we can do with BrainTap in 15 sessions without somebody monitoring them. And
so let's talk about what neurofeedback is measuring and what it's doing, and then what BrainTap is doing and how it can do it differently.
Sure. There's different neurofeedback technologies out there, so I'll kind of give a general overview. There's some that measure the brain and actually get the frequency it is and says, this is out of order, so we're going to feed back into the brain the frequency it needs, and then the brain follows it. Those are the neurofeedback devices I like the most, because now it's an active training. And those typically are about $12,000. So most people don't have them in their home. They go have 30 to 40 sessions. There's other neurofeedback that you can look at where maybe you're watching a movie, and while you set a brainwave activity for you, let's say it's alpha, 10 hertz. And when your brain's not in 10 hertz frequency or around that 11 to 9 hertz, the movie gets fuzzy. Mm-hmm. So you get this feedback that tells you you're in that brainwave state. You can also, for $200, get a GSR machine on Amazon right now, and just look up galvanic skin response systems, because you can do the same thing yourself at home. And you set it for 10 hertz frequency. And it's a very inexpensive way to train your brain. That's what my dad did with us when we were growing up, because of course, back then it was like $29, but now it's a couple $100. These are they're feeding back. So think about it like it's reading some part of your physiology and reading back. They even have ones that do sound, like autistic kids will lay on a mat, and it will measure the physiology in the body and will feed back frequencies to them. And the body, because of these mirror neurons we have, will respond to that frequency. And the good ones have an algorithm like BrainTap does that will guide the body back into that homeostasis like we were talking about. And there's probably 100 different devices out there that are really good. So, it's just a matter of what you want to do to train the brain and the body.
So when we're thinking about the brain wave activity, right, that's essentially what what we're kind of looking at with neurofeedback, kind of do an assessment of what's going on there. We've got a few different primary brain waves that are important, right? Delta, theta, alpha, beta, high beta. Can you explain those quickly? Because we want to tie that into then what BrainTap's doing and how is it altering those things?
What we do is we have studies with every brainwave. So they all do different things. So beta is a brainwave that's associated with reactionary mind, high dopamine, cortisol, norepinephrine. We need that brainwave. It's not a villain. If we didn't have it, we wouldn't be able to drive our cars or interact in life, but we don't need it. It needs to be about 45% of our activity. Alpha brainwave, which is the one just below it, where we get this, we call it the intuitive brain, because this is where you can't speak without alpha. That's why a lot of people have fear of speaking and they can't speak, because if you don't have alpha activity, you can't interact with your subconscious and get the words. As easy as it is for us to have this conversation today, it took a long time for them to get AI to speak, because it's a very difficult thing to interact and do that. So in our brain, we need alpha. So we need about 25 to 30% alpha. So now you're taking about, and I'm talking about your awakened brain now. So, and I didn't create this model. It's done with Ann Wise. She wrote a book called The Master Brainwave. She was our researcher at Light and Sound Research. And at that time, there was no gamma talked about, but I'm going to talk about gamma in a moment. Then we drop into theta. Most Americans, males, or most American adults don't have theta. That's why they're not sleeping. Theta is a very small brainwave. It oscillates between 4 and 7 hertz, which is a very low brainwave. Now, everyone experiences it when they go in and out of sleep. And it's a state they call hypermnesia, super memory state. So we train the brain to go to that state in most of our sessions. Now, when you drop into delta, delta is your unconscious, really. You don't learn in delta, although there's some people online saying they're learning in delta. I've never seen it in all the years I've been in. You're not there. It's like when you're asleep, you fall asleep on the couch and they lift up your hand, they go, oh, dad's asleep. We're not moving him. But then you come around, because wherever your consciousness is, it's not there. Your body is cleaning itself, doing its thing. It's doing its rest and digest and recovery stages. Now, gamma, they now know of over 40 hertz frequency. So there's a bandwidth between 20 and 40 that's can be high anxiety, things like this. But once you get beyond that, 40 and above, this is the bass drum of the brain now. For research with Alzheimer's and dementia, we should have at least 2 to 3% of our brain, if not higher, in gamma. The higher the brainwave activity in gamma, the less likely you are to have dementia and Alzheimer's. Think of it like the bass drum of a band. It's keeping the rhythm of the brain. When that gets lowered, and when in our studies we show that when people have high stress, they lose alpha, theta, and gamma. So they have this high delta activity, they have this high beta activity. So it's about training these different brain waves. We do need to train the brain to go into delta, but we need to train the brain to go more into alpha and theta. You don't have to train the brain for gamma, although we do have sessions for that. Because when you have more alpha and theta, it's kind of like a teeter-totter. The brain will actually activate more gamma when you're doing that.
So essentially, the stressors of life, how we interpret them, start to kind of throw off the amount and the rhythm of when we're in these different brainwave processes. We can measure that to some degree with neurofeedback. We're still kind of learning in that process. And then we can set strategies. How does BrainTap measure what's going on there, or what's the whole focus from the BrainTap perspective?
Yeah, we use something called NeuroCheck and WAVI. The difference is that NeuroCheck measures the nervous system. So something in the heart is called, instead of EEG, because these brain waves are very low frequency. So the WAVI, we can put probes on the brain and we can measure these. And there's different regions of the brain that have more alpha, theta, gamma, and all these different things. But the reality is that every cell is generating these frequencies. And when they're recruited together, that's when we get this percentage I'm talking about. And it's almost like cicadas, when one starts and the other one, the brain recruits these brain waves. But our heart actually is the most important brain. And it has 40,000 neutrino cells. You probably learned that from heart math as well. In this brain actually is communicating twice as much to the body as the body is to it. So it's generating a frequency response. We can measure that through HRV, which is called HEG instead of EEG. So we can measure that with the rings and the watches and things like that. And it's going to give us, our NeuroCheck is about 90% effective, the one that we have for the personal users that we're going to be coming out with here soon. But you can't wear it because we're sending a signal. It's like a card you hold on to. And you can, it's like when you have, if you have AFib and you have to check your AFib and send it to your doctor. We did something like that so that people can have a personal way of measuring it. But the metrics can do a good job. They will, that's how they do the sleep study. They know when your brain's in the deeper levels or the slow rhythm brain waves, that's going to give you the deep sleep. And that's when your brain opens up those gateways to the glial lymphatic system and detoxes the brain.
So we can there's different devices. Like, it's expensive to go get neurofeedback treatment, right? Yes. So heart math a little bit cheaper. What's BrainTap doing, and how does somebody know how to use BrainTap?
We use a device called the Friends Band, FRENZ. It's only $600. It's research grade, and you can wear it at the same time you're doing BrainTap. And it can measure brain waves in real time. And it's much better than the Muse. The Muse, I used to love the Muse. And I have a secondary software system that allows Muse to work. But Muse took theta off the equation because they don't realize in order to get theta activity, we need to have light stimulation as well as sound. It's virtually impossible for somebody to get into theta on their own. Now, there's a lot of people out there saying they're getting into theta, but when we measured in the lab, I've only had 4 people in the history of time out of more than 30,000 brains I've scanned that actually can generate theta activity on their own. So, I mean, we have it naturally, but to recruit it and encourage it, you need a stimulus like light, sound, and vibration. So we're adding in that experience, and you can measure that with the Friends Band. It's in the they go there. And
so somebody says, "Hey, I want to do some brain rehab, brain-based training." We called it in functional neurology. We called it brain-based training, right? We use different devices to try and do that: light therapy, sound therapy, movement therapy. You developed a piece of equipment called BrainTap that can help kind of do brain fitness, help rebuild, restore some of the function and raise your level of brain fitness, help rewire the frequencies. Does everybody need a Friends bracelet to be able to determine what they need, what they need for their brain? Or how do they, without a Friends bracelet, how do they know if they need the BrainTap and how to use it?
Well, you'll know if you're in touch with your physiology that it's working. You know, your sleep will be better, you'll have more energy, you'll have more cognitive skills and things, but you'll need some way to measure it. If you're, I call it the St. Thomas effect, you know, if you want to put his hands in the nail holes, you know, if you're that type of person that needs proof, then you'll need to get some kind of device to do it. Now, out of our 120,000 users, most of them do not have any way to measure it. They just get the effects. They know they're sleeping better, they're thinking better, they're performing better, things like that, because they rely on our studies, you know, instead of doing their own study.
Yeah, because I know we're running short on time, so I want to make sure I get this point. If somebody has sleep issues or stress issues or anxiety or depression, does BrainTap help with that? And is there a program or a process in the BrainTap that's going to tell them, hey, is it based on symptoms? Is it based on some type of a metric? How does somebody know that the BrainTap's going to be beneficial for them and how to use it?
Yeah. Well, we don't have a built-in way of measuring it through BrainTap. It has to be a secondary device. BrainTap is the tool to solve the problem. So we have like the quick start guide that has the morning, afternoon, and evening sessions picked out for the first 21 days. Most people will do that training. And that's why we actually give them 14 days to trial it without paying anything.
Why are they going to come to, like, what's going to drive somebody to say, I should get a BrainTap device over an Apollo Neuro, over some other device?
One thing is our science. We've actually shown that it works long term. Like we have a TBI study that shows 1 year after using it, the BrainTap group got between 30 and 70% neurologically better than the group that didn't use it. So we have a lot of science that backs ours up, but they're going to come to us mostly right now because of calls like this or with our doctors. We have 3,000 clinics out there using it. So the doctor recommends it, you know, but I think that we are building out the Friends Band people. We are building a unit that combines those two, but we're probably a couple of years away from actually having that.
But I want somebody to go, I have a sleep problem. This could help me. I have what should they be thinking symptomatically that might drive them to say, maybe the BrainTap can help me?
The biggest reason people use it is stress and sleep. That we can help you with stress and sleep, and we have protocols for that are when you get on there to use it. If you don't have a metric to measure it, then you're going to have to rely on your physiology to tell you.
Which is fine, but people are going to be like, okay, you guys talked about BrainTap. Why would I need it? And you're saying, hey, if you've got emotional stress issues, how about cognitive issues? Could it help with somebody with cognitive issues? So sleep, cognitive issues. What are the other?
We have a lot of athletes using it, especially boxers and UFC quarterback. I mean, the NFL, both quarterbacks in the NFL for the Super Bowl were BrainTap users because they understand recovery. So think about it like if you want to recover and get better brain function, you know, everyone's under stress. So if you don't have a great way to manage that stress, this is a tool you can use every 72 hours. You can use it every day, but as long as you use it within a 72-hour period, you're going to get a neurological uplift because the nervous system is trying to reset every 72 hours. So nothing's permanent. It's not like you can do it one time and you fix your nervous system. It's a training process that takes time for the brain to reorganize.
Okay. So we're just going to, if I summarize it this way, you tell me if this is good. Life is putting stress on the physiology, right? And that's going to alter our overall chemistry, our overall physiology. And it's training the brain in one direction. maybe one that's driving and making us really good at a stress cell danger response. We become very good at it, right? But that becomes the new operating mode. Something like BrainTap is helping restore more positive signals to the nervous system, so we can be more in a state of help shift us or keep us in that homeostatic state. And it's a tool that we can use on a regular, consistent basis, just like physical training, to maintain a higher level of overall health, brain health, neurologic health, and overall level of fitness. Is that fair to say?
Yes, that's good. That's a good way to say it. I like that.
Okay. Because people want to know, okay, what's it going to do for me? And it can be one of those tools that can make a big difference. It's not a one day you're done, but this is like physical training. This could be when you talk about physical exercise, good diet, nutrition, this could be, instead of getting a new set of kettlebells, you could get a device like this that could help you kind of train your brain and your nervous system, just like HeartMath can help with do a similar type of strategy. Apollo Neuro, all these devices are things that can train the nervous system and the physiology, right?
Yes.
All right. Last minute, I know we're running over, so I want to respect your time, but you have a new book out. So just give us give us a little summary of the book, and then I'll let you go.
Yeah, this book's available now. It's called Brain Fitness Blueprint. We have a 30-day plan in there. So if you go to brainfitnessblueprint.com, you can see a little bit about it. But basically, we're giving you tips. It's not about BrainTap. There's some things about the BrainTap in there, but it's about what can you do in daily life, like we talked about today, some of the concepts and things like that. It's an easy to read book. I didn't write it for my doctor friends. I wrote it for the end user, so that you can learn that, because brain fitness is for everyone. It's not just for unique people. You know, when you think about Noah and building the ark, he didn't build it when it was raining. He built the ark before it rained. So we need to think about our brain fitness before we need it. You know, we need to keep our brain operating at its highest level. And that means maybe getting a coach or somebody else it might not be just this one thing. You might need some more help. And there's a lot of great professionals out there like yourself that are working in this field. But we need to take time to work on our brain. So that's why we wrote the Brain Fitness Blueprint, is just my 40 years of experience. What have I found worked, didn't work, and correlating that with ancient traditions and modern technology.
But is it fair to say it's more about lifestyle habits and behaviors than it is, hey, you need these 37 supplements to
exactly
fix
it? We talk about some supplements, but the reality is it's about a lifestyle change. How are you going to change your lifestyle so that your brain and body function in this? I tell them in the book, your brain was not designed for the life you're living. So how can you modify it so it can be?
Yeah. Hey, Dr. Porter, thanks so much for coming on the Thyroid Answers podcast. I know we ran a little bit long. It's been a great conversation. I still got another page or so of questions, but we'll have to save them for a future time. So thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.